Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer Monday morning briefing with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin to take a proper look back at Hibs 2, Hearts 1 at Easter Road, a second consecutive Edinburgh derby victory for David Gray, the first time Hibs have won back-to-back derbies in the league since 2009. Just an all-round great result, second half performance, excellent from Hibs, well worth the win in the end. So we're going to take a sort of a more in-depth look at the game, because obviously we're a wee bit rushed in those moments straight after the game yesterday. Just before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is now brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so start your search today. Patrick, how are you this morning?
I'm very well. I think there's a lot to talk about from yesterday's game, which is just the way we like it. And I think another word for, just how kind of incredible this unbeaten run is. You look at the fact that it's making history. I think the latest stat is the first team since 1949. So it's kind of famous 5 era to go. I think it's 13 league games unbeaten, which is, quite a stat. And I think just sort of illustrates the remarkable turnaround in his team and, the sort of the good work that David Gray and his coaching staff are doing. And, especially when you consider what things were like after that 4-1 defeat at Dundee back in November, and even the 2-1 defeat by St Mirren prior to that. And it did look a bit like, Gray's coat was on an increasingly sugarier peg, especially when you got the dreaded vote of confidence from the board. But I think it's one of those. I suppose it's a victory for giving managers time to implement their ideas and to get players around to their style of play and thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really that kind of capped off. I say capped off, but it was another kind of milestone moment in the turnaround. Obviously, there's still quite a bit to go until the very end of the season. But to kind of tick off something like that yesterday, and the position that it puts Hibs into, now third in the table, 7 points clear of Hearts, who are down in 7th. So it's kind of, really starting to cement their place in that top 6 now. And I suppose, I think the man everybody's talking about yesterday is Jack Iredale, for obvious reasons. A brilliant goal to win the game. And
an assist for the opener, which everyone's forgetting about because the goal was that good.
It's just been kind of lost. I don't think he'll mind that too much. But yeah, it's a great moment for him. He's just been one of those players who's been a kind of model of consistency, and there's obviously been a lot of guys getting real plaudits for their role in this run of form. And it's not that people have been sort of overlooking Jack Iredale as such, but just that I think sometimes because when you're just very steady and very reliable, people. Again, I think take you for granted is maybe a wee bit too strong, but you kind of fly under the radar a wee bit while still being appreciated. But it was, I suppose, it was nice for him to get his real moment in the sun yesterday.
It was, and I think when you consider what he's given to the team since he came in, he had to be patient. The formation and I suppose the personnel David Gray was going with at the start of the season. The fact he had a bit of an injury to begin with, and then. He was getting kind of appearances off the bench out of necessity. I think he came on at Tannadice against Dundee United in that 3-2 game through injury. He came on against Dens. Came on against Dundee at Dens, and I think that was just a kind of reshuffle after Jordan Abita's red card. And I suppose, the sliding doors moment for Iredale was that red card, because that sort of suspension for Abita meant they kind of shuffled things, went to the back three, which, he'd already tried against Dundee United. And, we said at the time they looked a lot more comfortable in that sort of formation. With Iredale as the sort of the left-sided centre half in that back three. But I'm struggling really to think of a time, and I don't want to put the mouth on it, but I'm struggling to think of a time where he's kind of been, guilty of a mistake or an error or something that's put his teammates under pressure. There's not been an awful lot. And I think when you consider what the Hibs defence was like earlier in the season, it seemed like there were 2 or 3 mistakes every game, including the sort of goalkeeper and the back four at the time. And looking back, a centre back have had seasons, there's almost been that kind of feeling of, if you're talking about the centre backs, it's not in a good way. And I think it's just that, people say that, if you don't notice the referee, that's a sign he's had a good game. And I think it's a bit similar with Iredale. I think he just puts in those sort of like 7 out of 10 performances every week. 10 out of 10 yesterday, maybe. And I think, it's what Hibs need. It's what they were kind of lacking at the start of the season. He's just come in it almost feels derogatory to say steady Eddie, but that's exactly just, he comes, he knows what he's got to do. He does it well. No fuss, no frills. And, I think it's the whole team feels a bit like that. There are some good players in that team, but it's very much like it's a collective unit rather than a group of individuals. And, I think Iredale is somebody who kind of sums that up, perhaps most of all. And when you consider what he's been through to get to where he is, he spoke to the media before the derby, talking about being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 12, and then 3 anterior cruciate ligament injuries between the ages of 15 and 18. And then, of course, I know he was born in Greenock, but to move to New Zealand and then Australia, and then come all the way back from Australia to the country of your birth to play football, it's been a heck of a journey for him. And I think he sort of summed it up best himself yesterday. He said it was a special moment on a special day.
Yeah, it really was, and you could see how much that it really sort of meant to him. And then it's kind of emphasised there. When you're talking about all the things that he's had to overcome to get to this point. So he's really kind of pleased for him yesterday. As you said, he comes across really well whenever he speaks, and he's just, I think he's sort of, the steadiness of his performance has deserved a sort of crowning moment like that yesterday. And David Gray was very kind of full in his praise of him, because it's not that David Gray, he never, that he's reluctant to dish out praise to players, but he's always quite measured with it. And it's always, I don't want to talk too much about certain individuals, but I think to come out, and the first thing he said about him yesterday, he's a real man, and it's like, clearly, he's a guy who Gray doesn't just value him as a very good defender, but I think there's clearly a lot of influence there. On top of that, maybe stuff that we don't get to see, and it's just, it was a really good kind of moment for him. And I think if, just touching on David Gray there, you've kind of got to start maybe talking now about his big game record, because it was something that really sort of blighted Hibs. This first season of us doing Hibs Observer last season, and we talked an awful lot about how there was kind of no statement results and amongst the kind of various runs of form. But we're starting to see that now. He's starting to show a kind of a real ability to puzzle out these big games and find ways to get wins. You talk about winning up at Pittodrie. He's now beat Hearts twice. He's beat Celtic. Even the win up at Tannadice. That's beating the third place team in the league. He's really kind of showing sort of signs of really sort of growing into this role now, David Gray, in terms of being able to approach these big games and be able to get something out of them.
Yeah, and I think it goes hand in hand with what we were saying about Hibs just sort of finding a way to get a result no matter the circumstances. I think, when you look at some of his predecessors, you look at, Lee Johnson, you obviously look at Nick Montgomery, like you mentioned, Sean Maloney, managers who arguably had more experience in the job than Gray, when you consider, this is his first full, it's his first season as a head coach proper. I know he's had the 4 interim spells, but I think Gray himself would say it's a very different, it's a very different prospect when you're just kind of taking care of things on a temporary basis than it is when you're actually making the decisions on a weekly basis, or 3 times a week in the week just passed. And I think that he's had a lot of tests as the Hibs manager. He's had obviously a lot of adversity to overcome earlier on in the season. But I think, if you think back to the first derby, there were signs in that game. It wasn't great. I mean, derbies rarely are. We looked at Sunday's game. We said, there's 2 informed teams coming together. There should be a cracker. It wasn't. When will we learn? Not to say that there wasn't some good football, but I think it was, it probably played out the way that people expected it to. But, going back to that first derby, until an individual error towards the end, allowing Hearts to equalise, Hibs did look like a better team at times. I mean, it wasn't sort of as clear cut as it has been in some matches, and there wasn't a lot in it at all. But I think if you sort of chart the season, you can see like obvious progress, especially in like the big games. Maybe if you think back to we talked about the first derby, and then they go on to win at Tynecastle, and then they win yesterday with Rangers. Missed penalty, they lose 1-0 at Ibrox earlier in the season, then they get a draw at Easter Road. In January, they get another fight back. They beat Celtic after kind of improving with each performance against them. And I suppose even with Aberdeen, when you consider how well they were doing in the early part of the season, and that 3-3 draw, which was probably on balance deserved for the effort that Hibs put in, but again, conceded 3, and then to sort of play them twice after that and sort of get comfortable victories, you can see the trajectory that the team are moving in. And Gray just seems to have the answers for big games, and crucially, he also seems to be able to get a tune out of the team when it's not such a big game, when the games are maybe coming after, that are quite, I suppose, statement wins, like we were talking about. Mm-hmm. You mentioned going up to Tannadice, playing Dundee United away either side of, playing Dundee United away in the middle of sort of playing Celtic and Hearts at home. On paper you would say, well, that's 2 big games and then one slightly less big game in the middle. But I don't think Gray treats it like that. I don't think he lets the players treat it like that. I mean, we laugh about, every game's a big game, but I think that's the way that he approaches it. And I think you can see that. You can see that with the way the players, go into games, with the way they play, with the way they, the way they sort of speak about, their approach to matches. And I just think that, I don't even think it's not even that Gray set out and said, obviously if you're a Hibs manager, it's, have to beat Hearts, have to get, some big wins. I think it's just this sort of mentality that he's fostered, that he's built up, and how he's improved these players that, they can go into games like this, and instead of thinking, maybe we'll get an opportunity today, there's no reason we can't. And I think just that shift in mentality has been a breath of fresh air, really. Mm-hmm. I think, when you consider the number of sort of big or statement wins that Gray was involved in as a player, I think he's kind of taken that into management as well. And so far, so good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even just the results. I think you're seeing a clear progression in how he's managing these games in real time. Because there's been occasions where maybe the initial setup hasn't been spot on and he's made changes. Second half substitutions affecting the game. I think, Kieran Bowie and Junior Hoylett coming on to score against Dundee United is a perfect example of that. The one that maybe, kind of sticks out from a wee while back was, 2-0 down at home to Rangers. He made that change of shape, sort of pulled Josh Campbell back into the flat midfield 3, sort of sat off Rangers a wee bit, and it completely changed the game. And then yesterday, he's made some tweaks. I think he said that yesterday that his main message at half-time was that the quality had to be better, and that was certainly right. But Hibs were having a wee bit of trouble, I think, playing out with the way that Hearts were choosing to press. I think they were maybe trying to force it a wee bit at times. I think Gray said that as well. It was like, trying to score as soon as we got the ball. And I think it just needed a wee bit more composure. And then I think they come out second half. I do think they moved the ball quicker in general. But there was times where they maybe went a wee bit more direct to try and get, Nicky Cadden into the game a bit more, which he did in the second half, and that really turned things. And I think you can, when you've got the likes of Kieran Bowie up front now, you can do that if you want to go a bit longer at points. I'm not just talking about shelling it up the park, but what you can do is you can, if Hearts are pressing you can clip it over into him, and he can hold the ball up, and then you can that allows Cadden to get higher, and for players to then be able to find him then. So it's these wee tweaks and adjustments in games as well that are making the difference, because that is the sign of a good manager, because I think you can come up with game plans, you can set out formations, pick players, but things will happen within the game. You're going to have to solve problems. And I think he was, would it be fair to say he was maybe accused of not doing that in the early stages of the season? To an extent.
Accused feels a little bit strong, but I think there were times, even if you look at, I think it was the opening day of the season at St Mirren, Stephen Robinson made, I think, few changes that ultimately ended up being pivotal to the outcome of the game. One of them was a half-time change where I think he brought on Jayden Brown for Scott Hanser, I think, left wing back, and within sort of 2 or 3 minutes of the restart, Brown had set up the first goal for I can't remember who scored, Idowu, I think. And then later on, he made a double sub. He brought on Oisin Smith and James Scott. The two of them combined for the second and third goals. And the sort of comparison with Hibs was that, when I think it was still 1-0, instead of maybe, risking it, maybe going a bit more attacking, trying to find an equaliser and potentially a winner, he sort of went a little bit safer. I think he brought on Luke Amos and I think Mikola Kujorevic, and that was sort of taking off. It's tested my memory now. It's going back to August. I think he'd taken off Dylan Venti, and I think it was maybe another.
Was it Rudy Molotnikov?
Could have been Rudy Molotnikov.
Yeah.
So it felt a little bit like almost like kind of withdrawing a little bit, just saying we'll just sort of get a bit more defensive and maybe hope to hit them on the break and get an equaliser rather than just going for it. And I think it was like a sharp contrast in what Stephen Robinson had done and what David Gray had done. And it's understandable. It's his first full season. He's going to make mistakes. The sign of a good manager is whether they can learn from those mistakes. And I think we're seeing evidence of that. And even then, there were some other games where you thought there were maybe substitutions made at strange times, or that sort of looked like they contributed directly to him sort of conceding, whether it was to lose a game, whether it was to draw a game that they probably should have won. That happened a few times. But I think when you look back to this turning point against Aberdeen and the games that have come since then, the number of times that he's put on a substitute who's had a material impact on the final score, whether it's a goal, whether it's an assist, even just getting involved in the build-up. I think Dwight Gale against Dundee United in midweek, where he's involved in the build-up to the winners, and then he assists the third goal, which is sort of the icing on the cake, if you like. And I think we're seeing that more and more. And obviously, it's helped by the fact that he is getting. He has got most of his players fit now. I think at the moment, it's just Joe Newell that's sidelined at the moment. And I asked Gray about this at the weekend and just said, just before the derby, and just said, you're getting all these players back now. It really gives you a selection headache in terms of who plays and who makes the bench and who can come off and or who can come off the bench and impact games, because there's so many options. And obviously you'd much rather have that than be scrapping around and thinking, square pegs and round holes, when you consider like Junior Hoylett playing centre forward this season, Josh Campbell playing centre forward, even Jordan Abita playing central midfield, against Celtic last week. It's just that you don't maybe have the bodies. You're still finding a way, but when you look at it's an embarrassment to riches in terms of the attacking options. When you look at Ellie Ewan back on the bench yesterday, you've got Kieran Bowie able to start, Mikola Kujorevic able to start, you've got Dwight Gale to come off the bench and run himself into the ground for 15 minutes at the grand old age of 35. Junior Hoylett as well coming on. Martin Boyle. There's so much up top, but then you're seeing, in midfield, you've got Nathan Mariah-Welch coming in, you've got Nectar Triantis, Josh Campbell as well can hit the job. There's just so many options. And I think it's a bit mad when you consider how big the Hibs squad was and how, they've been doing this work to kind of trim it and, make it less bloated. And it obviously is less bloated now, but it just seems somehow that we've got more options. And I think that's just like I think it's testament to the work that's been done in recruitment, instead of this sort of scattergun approach where it's just like, almost sort of signing players on, sort of potential rather than saying, well, can they come in? Can they impact the team? Can they play the way we want them to play? Can they fit into the system? And I think that's, we're seeing the benefits of that. We're seeing, players coming in, who can really make a difference. You go back to Jack Iredale, you go back to Nicky Catton. Players who were signed to, what's the opposite of fanfare? I mean, it was just really, when they were brought in, it was just sort of like, almost like, oh, is that it? Which, I think there's a heck of a lot of people eating their words now. You consider how consistent Iredale's been, and now the fact that he's won Hibs at Derby, when you look at what Nicky Cadden's brought in terms of goals and assists. So, it doesn't always need to be, big name signing, if you like, that has an impact. It can just be, it's just if they can sort of fit into the way they want to play. And, Gray sort of deserves a lot of credit for, for how he sort of got everyone, the togetherness in that group is clear to see. The team spirit is clear to see. And I just feel that, we look at the players and how they've sort of turned things around. But at the same time, Gray has sort of evolved as a manager himself, whether it's making the right substitutions, like you say, or, just knowing what to do in big games, who to bring on when, that sort of thing. And even, I think even his press conferences when he speaks to the media, never too high, never too low, very consistent. And I think, Hibs fans just kind of crave that straight talking, no nonsense, no kind of tired cliches and nothing, no sort of strange metaphors. I think he's just very kind of straight up and down, and all these things are combining to make something that's good on and off the park.
Absolutely. Just before we look ahead a wee bit, there was another Aussie that you were quietly impressed with yesterday, Lewis Miller.
Yes, I mean, I've been quite critical of Miller at times because I think he can be quite. I think he's got a tendency to be a little bit. He can almost kind of overplays. There's been times where he's trying to be doing pirouettes on the ball when he's in the defensive third and things. Not the time or place to be doing that. I love the confidence. It's something I think you look at this team. There's a lot of confident players in it, and it's not just confident on the pitch, but just confident characters in general. Big personalities, not sort of arrogance. But I always think back to David Murphy when he was at Hibs, who you wouldn't sort of look at him and think he's an arrogant player, but he just had this confidence, like he knew that he was good at what he could do, and that came across on the pitch. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's kind of fondly remembered as for the player that he was. That in that Hibs team came up with some good goals as well, and just a sort of fan's favourite. But I think Miller has had this tendency to, I don't know if it's like trying too hard or whether it's just almost playing the occasion rather than the game. And I think it's been interesting that he started against Rangers at the start of January, and then he didn't get a start again until Celtic last weekend. Thought he was very good against Celtic. I thought he might be taken out of the team for the midweek trip to Dundee United, but he kept his place. And again, I thought he did well. The whole team was it was a bit of a flat performance until the sort of last maybe 20, 25 minutes or so. And obviously he was taken out of the team for the derby, and he was on the bench, and looking at who else was there, it almost felt like he'd be there as a sort of option for right wing back or centre back. And I think you'll remember even before Warren O'Hora got injured, I was looking at the back line and said I think it kind of feels like they need to bring Miller on for O'Hora, and then O'Hora suffers the injury and Miller has to come on anyway. But I just thought he looked like a person who knew exactly what he was supposed to be doing. There was no nonsense. He just stuck to his task, didn't try and sort of like catch the limelight as he sometimes does. He just went about his business effectively, quietly. And I think you can tell when you look at how the Hearts forwards played in the first half and how they played in the second half. And I think Miller was a very sort of big part in keeping them quiet. I think it's maybe a sign of that sort of maturity in players, and it goes back to what we were saying about about David Gray being able to get the best of these players. But I thought Cabangu for Hearts was like a real sort of like live wire in the first half. Gave the Hibs defence a lot of problems, and in the second half, very quiet. And I think a big part of that was the way Lewis Miller played him. And there was no silliness. There was there was no nonsense in terms of defending, but there was nothing silly from him. And I just think, it was a mature performance, and, the sort of display that we know he can put in, but, quite often he maybe lets his head run away with him a little bit, and he, maybe sort of tries to take on 2 or 3 men where he should be maybe shelling it up the park or just looking to play the simple pass. So, happy to criticise when it's warranted, but more than happy to praise players when it's deserved. And, Miller certainly deserves a lot of credit for how he played the game yesterday, and what he brought to the back line, and getting forward a little bit as well, supporting Chris Cadden on that right side. So yeah, really, really good performance from him. And I like we were saying about some of the other players in this team, almost going under the radar with how other players played, but just something I think is worth highlighting, because it was a good performance. And depending on how Warren O'Hora's injury is, we'll probably find out later this week when David Gray does his pre-match press conference ahead of the Celtic game. I wouldn't be against him sort of staying in that back three. I think he obviously started off as a centre back in his younger years, and then was sort of moved out to full back. But I don't know. I do like him at centre half. I do think it's almost like he's got less to worry about, and there's fewer chances for silliness. I just think he's, I just wonder whether it's maybe a position they should look at playing him in more rather than trying to get him to play fullback or wing back. It's good to have the sort of versatility and the fact he can do both. But I think his most impressive performances this season have actually been at centre half, which I think is an interesting point.
Yeah, that could be quite telling, actually. We'll find out later in the week whether Warren O'Hara is likely to come back for the Celtic game at the weekend. We may as well look ahead to that a wee bit off the back of this, because it's now, it's teed up for, I think, really just for Hibs to go and have a go at it, because it is, it'll be the most difficult fixture of this unbeaten run. It's one thing beating Celtic at Easter Road, but then having to go to Celtic Park and do it there, potentially over 120 minutes, if it goes to, if it ends up going the distance in the Scottish Cup. So it's a real, it's a real tall order. Celtic will be, there'll be not a hint of complacency about them, given what happened up at Easter Road. But I mean, I don't think there's any reason for Hibs to dwell on any of the potential negatives. It's this unbeaten run going on and on and on. I think now the longest since 1949. I read
1949. That's the
So the confidence is going to be high from that. By all accounts, the away ticket sales look very, very strong. They're going to be backed by a huge away support. It's I think it's just got to be a case of go and try and have a go and see where it takes you, isn't it?
Yes and no. I think you're right in saying it's, I don't want to say free hit because it isn't really, and there's certainly no way that David Gray will be treating it like that. But I think the fact that so recently they have beaten Celtic, and that sort of came after they played well against Celtic at Celtic Park back in December, and had it been for better finishing, might have got something out of that game. And then it wasn't. I mean, I know you can look at you can look at Celtic and say, look at the effort they put in against Bayern Munich in Champions League, and that's why they were a little bit flat at Easter Road. I think that does Hibs a disservice, because when you look at the players they've got, they've still got a lot of talent in that team. They've got a player they spent, 9, 10, 11 million on in Arnie Engels, starting with Luke McCowan, who obviously, they bought for $1 million in the summer transfer window. And you look at the forward line, you look at what they've done, how much they've spent on them. Celtic have got quality players, and we're not getting into discussing VAR and whether balls were or weren't over lines. But taking away sort of all that, I think Hibs managed to put in a professional performance against Celtic and got the result that the performance deserved, I think. And I think, David Gray will be using that sort of going into this quarter final and just saying, look, you've beaten them already at Easter Road. There's no reason why you can't beat them at Celtic Park. That's got to be the mentality to take confidence from, the fact they have already beaten Celtic. And I think, Gray's got, he never says this in advance. It's always sort of after the fact, always after the event. But he does a bit of say about, kind of using things to kind of inspire the players. So he talks about, like saying to them, if you win this game, we go third. You win this game, we go fourth, whatever it is. And I think you'll be doing that the same, saying, look, Hibs last won a game at Celtic Park in 2010. And that's that you feel like that has to be the kind of carrot in this one, saying like, you've already made history this this season. There's no reason why you can't go and do it again. Like, let's look at carried away. It's going to be a difficult task. You look at how many games Celtic have, or how many points Celtic have dropped at home. I know it's not a points game, but they're strong at home. I think a lot of teams are. So it's a big test. It's another big test for them. But I think it's something that they'll be approaching with a degree of confidence and I think maybe a calmness almost, because they know they can beat Celtic if they play at their best. It's going to take another Herculean effort like it did, last weekend. But I think the fact that it's sort of like taking each game at a time, I think that serves them well. And I think you say, right, you've won the derby, you've got that out of the way, you've got 9 points out of 9 in a difficult game week. I need you to go again for the cup quarter final. And you think about the team's ambitions at the start of the year, which is basically to finish. So I would say European places and go the distance in both cups. Didn't manage that in the League Cup. They've got a chance to do it in the Scottish Cup. They've got a chance to record a very good finish in the league. So I think that'll be the message. That'll be the inspiration. Sort of saying you've already made some history. Can you go on and make a little bit more? And I think that would be all you would need, really. You obviously progression in the cup and the chance to make it to Hampden again, but it's, as we know, it's one game at a time, so we don't look any further forward than that.
Any further. Yeah. Well, it's certainly teed up very nicely, and Hibs couldn't be going into it in any better place, really. So you think you think they've got to win again at Celtic Park at some point, so why not? Why not this weekend? With all this momentum behind them, all this confidence. So yeah, we'll build into that through the week, folks, but it just felt like taking a quick look at it off the back of yesterday's result, because it does, it tees up, as I said, a really, really interesting cup tie. We'll be back on YouTube tomorrow. It'll be Craig Nisbet and I taking a more tactical look at the Edinburgh Derby victory, so that'll probably be sort of early tomorrow, late afternoon, early tomorrow evening. Do keep an eye out for that. If you want to get notified when we go live, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and it means you won't miss out on that. Through the day, we've got more kind of post-derby content, looking at David Gray's record, also a kind of tactical analysis of the game yesterday, how it panned out, how it changed, how Hibs got the job done. So do keep an eye on that as well. If you're watching us on YouTube and you've not taken out a subscription to the website, that does cost you £1, but it does get you 6 months of full access to all our Hibs journalism. Nobody covers the club in as much detail. So do have a wee look at that. And if you do fancy signing up, we are biased, but we do think it's worth the quid's investment. So I'll leave it there just now, folks. Thank you for joining us. Really hope you enjoyed your day yesterday. I hope heads aren't too sore this Monday morning. I'd imagine they probably are in some cases. But yeah, we'll be back later on this week to build into the Celtic game and take a closer look at the Hearts game yesterday. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll speak to you again very soon. Cheers.
Thank you.